And we're back.
Hello.
And we're back.
And we are back. How's it going, Phil?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing okay. I'm doing quite well. How is everybody else doing?
We don't know. How's your week been? What have you been up to?
What have I been up to? I've been, this is the most boring thing I've ever done, but it's
Okay.
essential. Cleaning the kitchen. Had to happen. At some point, you don't want these visceral aliens to start evolving and growing inside. Between the cracks and and under the sink and all that. So things have to happen and cleaning must be done. We have to extract justice on the fancy Tupperware.
Fair enough. Fair enough. That is incredibly boring. What have you been working on this week? What have you been working on this week? Kind of creative projects.
Creative projects. I have been doing a album cover for a client who's doing a wonderful little musical cover for album for from Spirited Away, which is an animated film from Studio Ghibli, which I assume you know. Ghibli, actually, that's the right terminology, which I assume you know.
I do.
It's one of the most famous ones of theirs. So he's doing a piano cover of most of the songs in the score and asking me to do the cover to that. And so we've worked together in the past, but that's kind of fun. And also doing a label for a brewery that does mead based in Wales, which is also very exciting. So that's being done.
Nice.
There you go. What about you, Luke? What about you?
This week has been sort of a return to normal. I had family here last week, which was fun. But yes, this week I'm kind of back to focusing on writing my next podcast episode for a new show that is being produced through the company I work for, Noiser, and partnership with Spotify. It's a fun one. It's a sort of a crime. It's a crime series that looks at like rock and roll stars and the crimes that they've been involved in. So this particular episode is going to be on John Lennon and Yoko Ono and the time that they got arrested in 1968 for a drugs bust.
Drugs bust.
Yeah. So I've been reading up on Lennon and Yoko and the Beatles and writing the script, and it's pretty darn fun. Not gonna lie.
That's great. This is good to hear. That's on Noiser, is it?
Yeah, Noiser podcast. The show comes out in I think November, so we're writing ahead and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we have Kirsty Joe in the audience, and she says, "I'm here for Dredd." Oh, and Luke
for Dredd.
Yes. No, we got a really cool show tonight. I'm excited to have David Bishop or DD Bishop.
Oh yeah,
with us.
yeah. Absolutely.
In prep for tonight, obviously, Phil, you and I visited and revisited the Dredd films. I'd never seen
two films.
Yes, I'd never seen the one with Stallone, but I had seen the one with Carl Urban, which I liked quite a bit. I dove deep into the comics more so than I have ever done in the past. So I'm excited to talk about Dredd and a lot of the other stuff that David works on and has worked on, because he has a very he's working on a lot of different properties, and he's got some cool fiction out at the moment as well. So we're going to cover a whole bunch of stuff tonight. So I think what we'll do is we will bring David in.
He's here.
Hello, Dave.
Sir.
Oh no, I can't hear you.
Oh no, the audio's not working.
It's okay. It's my fault. I had you muted. Say that again.
Luke. Give me a heart attack.
Sound and everything. There we go. Great.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Welcome to this podcast. We're very, very happy to have you on.
It's my pleasure. Any opportunity to talk, frankly.
Absolutely.
We'll take. I'm shameless.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally.
So, David, tell us a bit about yourself. As a writer.
So my name is David Bishop. As people can tell from the accent, I'm originally from New Zealand, but I've lived in many places, so my accent has traveled with me. I am principally a writer. I was a journalist in New Zealand. I immigrated to the UK in 1990, which is a very long time ago now, and fell in with a bad crowd. I got involved in comics and started editing comics. I was helped launch the Judge Dredd Megazine in 1990, and I worked on that for 5 years. And then I was, I guess, promoted to become editor of 2000 AD, which for any of your viewers who don't know it, is a science fiction and fantasy weekly anthology comic, which has been running since 1977. And essentially it's where almost anybody British who's ever worked in comics in the last 50 years has been through the pages of 2000 AD at some point. So Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, Mark Miller, Garth Ennis, Alan Moore, as just some of the writers, and there's many, many artists who have worked at 2000 AD over the years. So I edited that in the second half of the 90s, so just after the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd film came out, I got switched over from the Judge Dredd Megazine to 2000 AD, and I worked there through to the summer of 2000, and then I quit and moved to Scotland and went freelance as a writer. And then my troubles really began. Then I've written an awful lot of tie-in books, more than 20 tie-in novels, officially licensed tie-in books. So a load of Judge Dredds, 5 Judge Dredds, 4 Doctor Who's, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Nikolai Dante, who's another 2000 AD character, Fiends of the Eastern Front, which is a World War II horror series with vampires. I novelized the pilot for the reboot of Heroes, which didn't last very long for obvious reasons. And I've also written audio dramas, so Doctor Who, Judge Dredd, Sapphire and Steel, computer games. I've written a lot of comics. I write for The Phantom, the Ghost Who Walks comics character. Oh. And now I write historical thrillers set in Renaissance Florence. And I teach creative writing in my copious spare time as well at Edinburgh Napier University. Yeah, that's the short version of me.
That's amazing.
So you're a busy guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. I once did a count to see what my peak year of most work, and in the year 2004, I had 600,000 words published in various storytelling media, and only half a million years the word after the year, only 500,000 words the year after, because I was slacking off. I started a master's in screenwriting the next year.
Wow.
I was young and full of something.
Full of something. What was that something?
People can draw their own
some of that.
Excitement.
That's amazing.
Something like that. So what was your... I always find this a fun question to ask different writers, but what was your kind of path into becoming a writer? Not necessarily working for, Judge Dredd Magazine, etc., but wanting to be a writer. What was that path like?
So I grew up in New Zealand, where there's not much of certainly at the time, there was not a lot of publishing industry, and you couldn't make any kind of a living from writing creatively. So I read everything at school growing up. I remember on one particular occasion, I was obsessed with getting hold of a copy of The Hobbit, and my local library didn't have it. So I walked for 3 hours to a library that did have a copy in stock, just so I could get it out of the library. And then I was too tired to walk home. I was 12, by the way, at the time, so I walked about 10 miles to get to the library. And then I had to phone up home and get somebody to come and collect me, because they didn't know where I was, because I just wandered off. So I was a very passionate reader, and I remember when I got to high school, it felt like I read every book in the library. It got to the point where I started reading doctor and nurse romances, which is not really my genre, but it was like the last books left that I hadn't touched in the library at that point. So I was a massive reader, and always wanted to write, and was always making up my own stories, the typical, basically, baby fanfic. I was writing James Bond 003.5 and imagining myself Mary suing my way into adventures. Absolutely. All those sorts of things. And then when I got to the end of high school, I realized I didn't have enough of a work ethic to succeed at university. Both my brothers had gone before me and had flunked out, and I was worried I would do the same. So I thought I needed another job, something that involves writing and also the power of the gab, basically. So I went into journalism. I did a 6-month journalism diploma, and then before I was 19, I was working full-time as a daily newspaper reporter and photojournalist, mostly because I was in the middle of nowhere and there were no photographers, so you had to take your own photos. And then you didn't know, it's before digital photography, this is the 80s. So you would take photos and you would send the film to the head office, and they would develop them and try and make something out of whatever garbage you'd supply them that day. So I did that for 5 years in New Zealand, and I got to the end of the 80s, and I was bored with writing other people's stories and writing about what other people were doing, and I wanted to be writing my own stories, making up my own narratives. And there was just, it's the end of the 80s, it's long before Lord of the Rings. The television industry in New Zealand was tiny and there was no obvious pathway into it. And so I immigrated to the UK. I thought if I wanted to be a writer in one form or another, the only way to do that in New Zealand at the time was to leave. That's why Peter Jackson's kind of revolutionary in New Zealand, because he said, I want to do these things, but I'm not going to leave. I'm going to stay and build an industry around me, which is why he's such a significant figure. Plus Lord of the Rings doesn't hurt. But the fact he actually stayed rather than everybody else, if you wanted to progress in New Zealand in cinema or storytelling, you had to leave effectively.
Yeah. That's quite cool. So when growing up then, reading James Bond, reading Tolkien, things like that, who do you have a specific kind of like singular writer who might be either your most favorite or the one who inspired you the most?
Well, being a Doctor Who fan, I read every Doctor Who novelization I could get my hands on. And so consequently, I read an awful lot of Terrance Dicks's books growing up. And Terrance Dicks, basically, he novelized 60 or 70 of the original classic Doctor Who shows. And so he would take, anywhere between 4 and 10 episodes of TV, so potentially up to 4 hours worth of TV, and condense it into 128 pages of story.
Wow.
So it's pretty brisk storytelling, I think would be the polite way to describe Uncle Terrance's style. So I really like Terrance Dicks, but actually my favorite was a writer called Malcolm Hulke. At least I think that's how you pronounce his name. I've never actually heard it pronounced. It's Hulke, but with an E on the end, who was also a Doctor Who writer. Right. And he adapted some of his stories into novelizations. But what was different about his is that he would embellish on the story. He would dig into the characters. He would give supporting characters an inner life and a backstory and bring them alive. So I found his were particularly influential. But yes, my style is, because of that, and having worked in journalism and then having worked in comics as a fiction writer now, the one thing my stories do not lack is pace. I think is the best way to describe them.
Yes,
I automatically go to pace. And actually, I have to force myself to slow down and linger and give more of a feeling and an atmosphere and bring alive the sensory immersion for the reader. I have to make a conscious effort to do that, because I'm more like, crack on, move on, please, is my default setting.
Yeah. But to be fair, that's a skill that a lot of writers wish they had. That sense of pacing, that really frenetic sense of, being able to tell something very consistently and concisely, I think that, I've seen a lot of writing in movies that have been coming out recently, then I was just like, pacing, please, some pacing.
Yeah, you can knock half an hour out of this. When I was in my youth, I unfortunately broke my tailbone on a wooden vaulting horse by landing arse first. So for the rest of my life, I'm haunted by a broken tailbone, because there's nothing they can do about it. But it means that my arse has a particular sensitivity to when I'm bored, because my arse will tell me that this is boring me now. So any film that is not fully engaging me, and I'm not leaning in and I'm not enjoying the narrative, if I'm sitting back, and then I'll start to notice how uncomfortable cinema chairs generally are.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I would say right now the current landscape, structure and pacing are
definitely a requirement these days.
Dwindling. Their
and they're
qualities that
dwindling.
need to be enhanced. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I
So-
watch a lot of TV dramas, and what was this show? Blackbird, which I think is an Apple TV series. It's like a crime show, and it's 6 episodes. It's all very well done. It's great, but honestly, the first 2 episodes could have been 1 episode. You could have just, okay, we get to this point now, and let's move on. And then spent a whole episode just setting a bunch of things up. I'm going, oh, come on.
Do you
Dennis
think?
Lehane, you're great, but you're just overstretching us.
Yeah. Do you think? Obviously, journalism, yes, but also, do you think writing comic books is one of the kind of key factors as to why you're very paced focused? Because I've written a couple of comics in the past. I've read a whole bunch, and I mean, there really isn't time to kind of dawdle with comics. You do gotta keep it going and keep it interesting, or the reader will get boring. Do you think that had a big influence on you in terms of the way you handle pacing?
Absolutely. Also, because I'm from the British tradition of comic storytelling, so things like Judge Dredd in 2000 AD, the episodes are only 5 or 6 pages long. And if it's an ongoing serial, that means you have to tie up last week's cliffhanger and then progress the story forward and set up another cliffhanger. And you've got to do that in 5 or 6 pages, which is 30, maybe 35 pictures if you're lucky. And it's probably 4 or 5 scenes. And then you've got to get out and make us want to come back next week. So the level of concision and compression that's required is massive. Whereas it's why so many British comics writers are very successful in the US. Also, the money's better. But they're very successful because they're so used to having to write in such a compressed manner that when you give them 20 pages to tell a story, they're like, oh, the wide open vistas. I can stroll. I could have a full page splash just because I can.
Yeah.
Just because I could have a double page splash, which just never happens in 2008. There isn't room for a double page splash generally.
Really?
So it is slightly beaten into you, the need to crack on with the plot, get to the thing, get to the next thing. It is now inbuilt into me, and I have to consciously think, okay, let's ease into it. I don't have to have everybody dying on page 2.
Right.
Wait till page 4.
Thin it out.
Yeah.
So let's. I think I'm interested to kind of know how you then got into working with and on Judge Dredd. How did you find yourself, editing Judge Dredd magazine and all that kind of stuff? Tell us about that journey.
So when I immigrated to the UK, I had a letter of introduction to the editor of Doctor Who magazine because I'd written to him, and he wrote back and said, yes, come along and we can talk about work. And I went in to see him, and he said, no, there's no job here, which was disappointing because that was my one job lead that I had, having moved halfway around the world with one suitcase, some cash, and a dream. But the best advice he gave me was, at that point, if you bought the Guardian newspaper in the UK in the early 90s, there would be 20 pages of ads in the media industry on a Monday morning that you could apply for. Back when newspapers still had, classified ads and job ads before the internet, of course. And he said, just apply for every job you see on a Monday in the Guardian. And I did. And one of the jobs I applied for was to be assistant editor of a new launch from the House of 2000 AD, which was a monthly comic aimed at adult readers called Revolver. And I went in and interviewed it, and I didn't get the job, but they were preparing to launch the Judge Dredd spin-off, the Judge Dredd Megazine, later that year. And so Steve McManus, who had been editor of 2000 AD in the golden age through the 80s, with Alan Moore and Halo Jones and all the greats that came out in that period, he was going to be editing the magazine. He said, well, come and work for me once we're ready to go, once we're ready to launch, come and work for me. Because I had a background in journalism. I had read comics growing up in New Zealand. So I had a range of skills. I wasn't just a comics fanboy. I had my own skills that I could bring to the party. So that made me a useful asset. I could bring more than one thing to the mix. And it's one of those things that in comics in particular, I think, and this is true particularly of writers as well, some of the most interesting writers in comics are people who don't just come from I'm a comics fanboy background. They have other interests They not just watch films, they read books. They're immersed in a broader culture. It's not just like, I've only ever read Batman and Superman, and my dream is to write Batman and Superman, and then revive, I don't know, Batmite and Bathound or something. And that's the limit of their ambition. Whereas if you bring people who've got a broader cultural frame of reference, then the hope is that they will bring some new ideas, or bring at least a fresh collision of ideas to the mix. So I got the job being Steve's assistant on the Judge Dredd magazine when it launched, which meant I got to work with Alan Grant and John Wagner, who were sort of the consulting editors and two of the giants of British comics from the 70s onwards. And in a load of one of my first jobs that Steve said to me was, we can't keep picking the pocket of 2000 AD and stealing all their best creators. We need to find the next generation of creators. So one of my jobs was to go through the submissions pile and look for new artists and look for new writers that we could bring on and develop, who would hopefully then become the next Wagner and Grant and Pat Mills, and the next Grant Morrison, the next Pete Milligan, and the list goes on. So that was my job, was assisting on the comic, finding new talent. And then within a year, I took over from Steve as editor of Judge Dredd Megazine, once I'd sort of learned my craft, the editorial craft.
Wow.
Chrissy Joe in the audience says that she totally agrees, and that if you bring in someone with a different perspective to any job or project, it's beneficial, which I also agree with. And I wonder if the kind of the current state of comics in general, or maybe just with the two big ones, DC and Marvel, I'm wondering if they're really doing that anymore, because it feels quite. When
Insular?
I read some comics, it feels quite narrow, feels quite stiff. When you think about comics from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of interesting stuff and a lot of new and interesting characters being created. And I wonder if we've sort of taken a few steps back over the last 20 years or so within that industry. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem that Marvel and DC have got is, if you're a new and emerging creator, unless you're absolutely burning to tell your Batman story or your X-Men story or whatever it might be, and then if you've proven yourself through your own work, then you come in and you do your men in capes and tights hitting each other's story, and then you go back to telling the stories you really want to tell. Because the problem with corporate properties like that is that there is a big red reset button. You don't get to truly do what you want to do with it. Or if you do, somebody else will come along and erase it, and then we're back to whatever it was before you were there. So there's no... It's the illusion of change with big IP like that. It's the illusion of change, it's not the reality of change. So that's always the difficulty that you have as a creative. And also with the likes of Image Comics... and there's plenty of other places where you can publish your work, or with Kickstarter or other crowdfunding platforms are available, means that you don't have to go to Marvel and DC to create the work that you want and find a readership for it, which just wasn't possible 20 years ago. You kind of had to go to those places to get out into the world, and you don't. There are other routes to market now, so therefore, why should you go and, kowtow to the corporate man when you can tell the story you want, be as rebellious and anarchic as you want, and keep control of your rights?
Yes. No, I agree. I think the indie route is a really fascinating one, and there are some really cool stuff coming out through that. But back to Dredd. So what was your kind of first introduction to the character, and what did you make? What did you make of Judge Dredd?
Well, in New Zealand, we used to get British comics, but they were literally shipped out to New Zealand by boat. So we will be getting the Christmas issue in April. So it would be like sort of snow on the logo and Dredd running through the snow, and then we'd be reading it in April, which in New Zealand is sort of autumn effectively, because we're coming into winter at that point. So there was a slight disconnect. The big challenge was 2000 AD's weekly, and it was really hard to get a consistent weekly supply of something like that because the shipping was so erratic. So you couldn't guarantee to lay your hands on the next issue. And because it's a heavily serialized anthology title, that made it problematic. So I did read some issues of 2008, but I didn't collect them. So I think the first Judge Dredd story I can remember, it's an early episode of a story called The Judge Child. And Dredd is he's en route into the cursed Earth. So he's left Megacity 1 and he's traveled out into the irradiated wastelands that is Middle America in the future, 122 years in the future. And he stops in Memphis, Tennessee, where they have pyramids and where there's a guy, his name I can't remember, like Phineas or something. And he's the king of garbage. So he has a coat which is entirely made out of the ring pull tabs from 1970s Coke cans. And it's like mithril. It's like the richest, most expensive jewelry you could own. Yeah. Because he owns the garbage dump from 100 years in the past. Yeah. And so he's got all this incredibly exotic garbage, which is now the treasures of the future. And so there's a scene where he's being pulled through the streets of Memphis, Tennessee with the pyramid, and there's like a sphinx that's been carved in his own to resemble his own face. And it was just the level of wild imagination, just like, wow, my head was exploding. It's just how random and bizarre this stuff was. Amazing artwork by Ron Smith as well, written by Wagner and Grant. And it was just a wild imagination. It was the sort of thing that you didn't see. So I was reading mostly Marvel and DC comics and sort of superheroes and people hitting each other, and it was in colour. 2080 was all in black and white pretty much at this point. And yet somehow the level of imagination it showed was so much more than what you found in your average superhero comic. So that's what stuck with me. The problem was I couldn't get it on a regular basis. Yeah. So it lodged in the brain. I can still remember reading that issue around at my friend Roger Eagleston's house, but then I had to give it back.
I love that. So then, jump into the future, and you're sitting there writing your first Judge Dredd story. What was that like? Finally writing this character that you kind of followed off and on, and you're now he's now yours to do something with.
Yeah, it's daunting. Because at that point there have been hundreds, probably 1,000 Judge Dredd stories, and you're sort of thinking, what have I got to say that's going to be different from every other Judge Dredd story that's been told? Yeah. I mean, this is why, DC and Marvel, you struggle to come up with what can be said about this character that hasn't been said before. And it's challenging. And then you have a choice. You either work with the world that's already been created for you and work within that, or you try and bring something else to the mix. I'm trying to remember what the first Dredd story I actually wrote was. I can't off the top of my head. I did write one where there was a bunch of... It was all to do with Elvis impersonators and Dredd. There was like a convention of Elvis impersonators, and they were all fatties, of course. So they were into the Vegas era on the toilet kind of Elvis, what jumpsuit and quiff and the whole bit. I can't remember what else happens in the story. It was drawn by an amazing artist called John Hicklinton, whose style is pretty outrageous and fairly grotesque at times. So I think that's the first Dredd strip I wrote. It was okay. I mean, the reality is, the difficulty I had when I was editing Dredd and 2000 AD is I always felt that editors shouldn't be allowed to write for their own comics because you're already being paid to do your job. And to me, also, when you've got the likes of John Wagner or Robbie Morrison or whoever else it might be, Dan Abnett, available to write for the characters, and they're great writers, and they're better comics writers than you are, then why are you paying yourself to take work away from freelancers who can do the job better than you can? So I always have a difficulty with editors paying themselves or hiring each other to write for the comic. I mean, I've done it a couple of times myself, and it always felt wrong to do that. Yeah, right. But writing for Dredd, I mean, I've written 5 Judge Dredd novels, and I quite enjoyed that because it's a character that's created for comics, and actually it gave you an opportunity to dig into the world and what it would be like to be a citizen living in the world of Dredd. And often that's where the most absurd and the funniest stories are told, the tales from the point of view of the citizen. So when I'm writing for Dredd, or when I've written for long-running characters like the Phantom, I tend to do other characters' point of view, so that you have your iconic character and they enter, but we see them from what it is like for other people to meet them and encounter them. Yeah. rather than from the hero or the anti-hero in the case of Dredd, from their point of view. Because I'm like, well, if I'm going to read a Dredd story, I'd rather have John Wagner or Rob Williams, somebody like that, writing it, because they do it so well. Whereas if I was to write a Dredd story, I tend to do it from somebody else's perspective, because I find that more interesting.
Yeah,
No,
I
totally.
can see that.
No, I totally think that that's a very interesting take to, be able to always, like, especially with certain, like, main characters in, popular culture, for example, like in entertainment, which is what I'm talking about, with, like, be it your Supermans, your Batmans, your Judge Dredds. I think that it's always so much more fascinating being able to see them from a distance, because that gives you such a different layer of just in respect, in a way. Like, it just elevates them up to something that's completely different than what you would see if it was just through their eyes.
Yeah,
normally.
that's why I'm a huge fan of the miniseries Marvels, the comics miniseries Marvels, with the painted art by Alex Ross. Oh God, who wrote it? I want to say Kurt Busiek, but I'm not convinced I've got that right. Anyway, it's the story of the early '60s, like the beginning of the Marvel age, the early '60s, the emergence of Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, and the very early stuff. But it's told from the perspective of a photojournalist. So it's the man on the street imagining, and there's like an amazing sequence where Galactus turns up for the first time, and everybody's like, "We're all going to die. This is the apocalypse." And it had that sort of 9/11 quality that feel like suddenly you realize your smallness in the scale of the world, and the world is being reshaped around you. Everything you knew and trusted and believed to be life suddenly is up for grabs. Or when COVID happened, and suddenly the world ceases, and we're all just standing around going, "What now?" So it's those sorts of stories that I particularly appeal to me as a writer, is to tell those versions of, take familiar stories with iconic characters, but see them from a different perspective. I find that fascinating approach. So that's how I tend to tackle Dredd. Or comedy. Yeah. That's the other go-to with Dredd. The great thing about Dredd as a character is you can tell it absolutely straight and hardcore drama and adventure or tragedy, or you can completely flip it and go total absurdity, and yet the character can sustain anywhere on the tonal spectrum, from drama to comedy to tragedy and everywhere in between. And that's not really true of a lot of comics characters, but Dredd, because of the way it's been written over the years, it has this flexibility. Also, visually, it's a character almost anybody can draw it, and people will go, "Yeah, that's Dredd." I mean, it's in the ballpark of Dredd. So stylistically, it can take a lot of different approaches. Super cartoony, photorealistic, everywhere in between. It can sustain that, which is not always true of some iconic characters.
Yeah, it's very malleable. Very malleable.
Yeah, exactly that. And it's a malleable character to write and to draw, which is brilliant.
Yeah, that's fun. So I apologize if I'm always like fiddling around here. I'm actually drawing, so I'll definitely share that when we're close to the end of the podcast. That's what I do.
Sometimes what we do is we will have Phil sketching some stuff while we're chatting, but we don't want the fourth window up, because that would just make things too small.
Yeah.
So I find it interesting that you like telling these stories from the outsider's perspective, kind of looking at Dredd as he's coming towards you, sort of thing. Because I feel that really is an interesting way to explore that character. And I suppose, so from that perspective, then you're able to explore what makes that character tick, but in a kind of slightly different way. So I guess for you, when you're writing him, what are the things that make Dredd tick? What makes Dredd who he is?
I mean, and Dredd, an adherence to the law is absolute with Dredd. And for him, the law and justice is not a lot of wiggle room between the two of them. He will tend to default to the law, but there are rare occasions in comic strips over the years where you see Dredd willing to set aside the law in favor of what is just in a situation. So that it gives you some nuance within him. Also, how he's been written over the years by his original creators evolved. Because as far as they were concerned, he was a fascist who was oppressive. It was a police state. It absolutely was written as a police state. And yet they got to a situation after about 8 or 10 years whereby readers just believed that Dredd was the hero of the story. And they were like, no, this is a police state. He's oppressing everybody here. This is terrible. So they made him increasingly oppressive and villainous and said that this is anti-democratic and all these things. And yet there were still some readers who were like, no, but this is great, yay. And sort of like, you would feel differently if you were living in this world. You know,
just a bit.
Not, just a bit. I mean, you know, because most British police aren't armed, routinely armed. Okay, you're not in danger of just getting shot at any given moment in Britain. You know, it's the old Robin Williams gag, you know, stop, or I'll say stop again. But of course, in America, with the police increasingly have turned into a version of Judge Dredd with their riot gear and their, you know, they've got their armored police wagon, which is straight out of Judge Dredd. And, you know, God forbid you be, you know, black and alive at the same time in America, because then you've just got a target on your back. Or on your face. So Dredd has always been a quite terrifying, you know, warning of the future, what it could become, and yet America has wandered ever closer towards it with the, you know, the funding of the police as a militaristic force, effectively occupying cities. And so it does have some very powerful resonances to deal with. So it's Dredd as a character. What I like about Dredd is he does have a moral code. There are things Dredd absolutely would not do. If you break the law, you will be punished. But that doesn't mean that he will just impose himself for the sake of imposition. You know, it's not about the glory of him, and it's not about him wielding power for its own sake. And he's, you know, the reality is thanks to regen technology that keeps him relatively young, but the reality, he's got like bionic eyes and everything else. So large parts of his body have been replaced. He's like, you know, grandpa's, you know, broom at this point. There's not much of the original.
He's basically Darth Vader.
Yes, we've replaced most of him, but he's still going strong. So, I mean, that helps in terms of the longevity of the strip. But yeah, I mean, he's an interesting character because you're never quite necessarily sure what his ultimate reaction is going to be.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been periods in the 90s, particularly where he's written in a sort of vaguely Schwarzenegger-esque, you know, quip and shoot and another quip again. And that's not really Dredd. He's not one for quips. Other people may attempt quips and he'll just give them a withering glare. But he's best... I think Dredd is best written when he's pretty taciturn and monosyllabic.
Yes. Pathfinder in the audience says Dredd is the only thing that keeps the thin fabric of order from tearing apart. Mega City 1 felt like it was seconds away from destroying itself. Do you agree or disagree, David?
Pretty much. I mean, certainly there have been occasions where without Dredd, that's it, the whole city would be destroyed. Notoriously through the Apocalypse War, where half the population, 400 million people, were wiped out by the Sov invasion forces and being nuked. So he retaliated by nuking an entire city out of existence. I think the famous line is, next time we get our retaliation in first, which is sort of the Dredd philosophy, when in doubt, blow things up. So, yeah, I mean, he's willing to do whatever it is to save his city and to save his citizens as an ideal and as an idea. Individual citizens, less so.
Yeah. I think what really struck me as I was exploring the comics is the early stuff was exactly how fascist he was, how, you know, the people, you know, you're rooting for the people because they're like, we want democracy. And they're like, no, you're not going to get it. That is the cancer. You can't have it. So it's fascinating. What is it about the character then that despite being blatantly the villain, that somehow people were seeing him as the hero? Was it just they didn't want to accept him as the villain? And just what do you think that? Why do you think that is?
I mean, partly I think it was because it was during the 80s, and in the UK, you had the sort of self-flagellating tendency in the British populace
Right.
to want to be ruled with an iron rod, which is why we had the Iron Lady in power for so long
Yep.
in the UK.
Yep.
So the idea that they were like, they were brutal, but at least you knew where you stood. There was some sort of assurance to be had out of that, and that Dredd would get his man and he would
Mm-hmm.
succeed. But the reality, of course, is, Mega City 1, generally speaking, I think it's like 95% unemployment. But then there's like, the equivalent of everybody's on social welfare, but there is actually some sort of social welfare system to support. So there is a support network,
Right.
limited as it may be, but nonetheless, the people are supported through all of that, because you have a society effectively where most people don't work, but there's a social welfare net to support them. So therefore, people just have weird hobbies and quirky obsessions, and everybody's trying to make themselves seem interesting and important. So big surgery to give himself the world's largest nose, and then had diamonds encrusted on it because somebody else got a bigger nose than him, and just random things like that. So I think the reason why, because Dredd can be trusted to do what he's going to do. So there was a level of assurance about that, even though you sort of go, I mean, there are times where you'll see somebody do something and you think that is wrong, and don't you wish the judges would turn up and sort them out? But equally, if you've run a red light or you haven't paid your bill lately or whatever it is, you wouldn't want the judges to turn up and sort you out. So it's an idealized version of justice, but you wouldn't actually want to live there, I think, is the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
And also, I think the British people are remarkably compliant. You compare that to the reaction of the French. I think if you'd said to the French that their power bills were going to treble in the next year, they would have set fire to the Louvre by now. Whereas, the Brits would just stay home and grumble a bit more and complain on Twitter, and that would be about the level of their rebellion. It takes a lot to make British people stop queuing.
Yes, I mean that's basically that is basically what they do now. They take to the social media, and that's their protesting.
That's their rebellion. Hashtag.
So when it came time, so by what was it, 91 that you were working on the magazine? I somewhere around that. Yeah. So that means you're doing that at the time that the first film is coming out, or starting to go into production, like all that kind of stuff. So what were your initial thoughts? I mean, were you hearing stuff in advance because you were working with the magazine, working with the character already? Were you hearing little rumblings of what was going on, what was happening with that, or were you just like, what were your thoughts as you were hearing bits?
I mean, it was sort of 2008 gone through this golden period where it sold 100,000 copies every week without fail. And that continued all for the first 10 years the title was going. And it started in 1977, and boys' adventure comics, as they were called, were dying. They were just dying, absolutely. In 2008 was the freak exception to that, because it found its audience and it kept its audience, and it gradually grew up, and the storytelling became more sophisticated and more grown up as the audience grew up with it. But it retained its loyal readers, and it kept adding new readers, and that was unheard of in British comics in the 70s and certainly in the 80s. Comics just didn't last. But 2008 stuck. But when you got to the early 90s, a decline started to set in. Creators were all leaving to go and work for DC Comics, for Vertigo, and a little bit for Marvel. So they were struggling to hold on to the best talents that were available. They had to find new talent to bring them on. Sales were starting to slowly decline. You had the rise of early console and computer games were sort of drawing the eye of young male readers, which was predominantly what the readership was at the time. And so there were other entertainment options, VHS, etc., etc. The list goes on. So comics ceased to be as an essential purchase for people that had been in the past. So the idea that Dredd would be turned into a film had sort of been the great hope that this was going to do for Dredd what the Tim Burton Batman film had done for Batman. Because Alan Grant, who was writing, had written Judge Dredd for years. He was writing detective comics when the first Batman film came out in the summer of '89, the Summer of the Bat. And Sale Detective Comics, which was the first DC comic, almost was about to be cancelled. And then Batman by Tim Burton came out, and sales went from 35,000 copies a month to like 1 million copies a month. And they stayed at 600,000 copies a month for years. It wasn't just like, oh, the film's out, huge sales. And then, no, it went up and just stayed up for years on end. Batman sales were massive thanks to that film.
Yeah.
So we were like, well, let's have a bit of that, please. That would be brilliant, because that would goose our sales right up, and we'd all be laughing. You know, and John would be a millionaire after that, which would be great. And so would Carlos, who co-created Judge Dredd with him. So that was always the hope. Now, the problem was the rights had been acquired in the 80s. And then RoboCop came along in 87 and absolutely was Judge Dredd in many ways. You know, near future, dystopia, highly satirical, absurdist moments. Even some of the lines were just like, you know, comply now or there will be trouble. You could just hear Dredd saying some of those lines.
Oh, 100%.
And the problem then was like, well, you couldn't do Dredd as Dredd because it would just seem like a knockoff of RoboCop. So they had to find another way to reimagine how they would do Dredd. And then in the early 90s, so Schwarzenegger was in the frame to be Dredd for quite a while in the early 90s, around the time of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. They were looking at Schwarzenegger for it. I think Time Out magazine in London did a mock-up with Schwarzenegger as Dredd on the cover. I think that's 92. And then, so he was in negotiations to do the role, and then he dropped out, reasons. And then in order to make the film they wanted to make, they needed a big Hollywood star, because the star system, big action hero, was still in the works at the time.
Absolutely.
And basically, now we've just got Tom Cruise and that's it. But at the point, it was like you had sort of, you know, Van Damme and Bruce Willis and Schwarzenegger and Stallone, and you had the whole Planet Hollywood crew, effectively. And all of them could open the film around the world. And it needed to go around the world in order to make its money back. So Schwarzenegger was in the frame, then he was out of the frame, and then it was going to be, then they got Stallone signed on, and suddenly it was like, okay, great. And then it was like, who was going to write it, who was going to direct it, and then where was it going to be filmed, and those sorts of things. So we started getting scripts were coming into the office, drafts of scripts, which were based on the comic, but which had a sort of Hollywood sensibility of what Dredd would be like and the sort of story they wanted to tell. And then Danny Cannon was contracted as the director for the film. And he'd only done, I think, one feature at that point, which was Young Americans with Harvey Keitel, which was sort of like a London gangster noir-ish kind of thing, which is reasonably well regarded. And off the back of that, which probably cost about $5 million to make, he was now in charge of the Judge Dredd film with a budget of, I think, $80 million at the time. You know, I mean, they spent serious money on it. So it was, there was a lot of sort of versions of the script were coming in. John Wagner, the writer-creator of Dredd, sort of, you know, was advising to an extent, but they were listening to him sort of, kind of, but only to an extent. And Danny Cannon's vision of Dredd was very much sort of in the style of like a Roman Ben-Hur kind of epic. He wanted it to have that feel and that look. And then actually the person who made it most like Dredd in the comics was Stallone. Was that Stallone started reading the original source material and then insisted they put more and more of the comic into the film script. So he was the one who drove it closer and closer to the comics version of Dredd. And that's how you end up with things like Mean Machine and the Angel Gang. Randomly, the ABC Warrior robot turned up, which somehow ended up in the film. But you ended up with a mashup of bits of The Day the Lord Died and The Return of Rico and some of the sort of early classics of Dredd mashed together. So it was a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster kind of script with all sorts of bits and a lot of people chipping into it, a lot of rewrites along the way. And I remember they were building sets at, was it Pinewood or Shepperton? I can't, one of the two anyway, because there were only two film studios in Britain at the time. And unlike now, And yeah, they like were building sets, and they got to a point where the line producer said, "Okay, the whatever date it was, something August 1994. The script now is locked. We can't be rewriting any more of this because otherwise the film's not coming out on the date in the middle of summer 1995 that is fixed. This is the point. We must stop mucking about. This is where it will be this or not." So that was the challenge of that. Was they sort of got to the point to go, right, now we just have to, in order to do the relatively primitive special effects of the time, we have to stop designing and start shooting now.
Yes. So Kersey Joe in the audience says that so when you had to reimagine Dredd to not be mistaken as RoboCop, how did you decide what aspects to change or keep?
Yeah. I mean, the big question with Dredd is always, is he taking the helmet off? Because, of course, in the comic, he never takes the helmet off. You never see him with the helmet off. That's one of the things that's iconic about Dredd as a character, and it's what's notable about the 2012 Carl Urban version is, although you see him with the helmet off, it's all in shadow and some and Carl Urban, famously said, well, he wasn't doing it if he was taking the hat off, kind of thing, because that wasn't Dredd. Whereas if you're paying Sylvester Stallone, I'm guessing 20 million or thereabouts to do the film, then you're going to want to see the face of Stallone, because that's what most people coming to see the 95 Dredd film are coming to see Stallone. They're not coming to see Judge Dredd. And I remember you were sort of, because he was coming off a good run, Stallone, at that time. He'd had Cliffhanger, which was a big international success. Demolition Man, which again felt like it was sort of ticking a lot of the Judge Dredd boxes without actually being Judge Dredd. And it had Stallone in it. And then you're like, you're not leaving us a lot to work with here, people. So you always knew that the helmet was coming off. If you've got Stallone playing the role, he's not going to wear a motorcycle helmet for 90 minutes or however long the film ends up being.
Yeah. Again, back to Kirsty Joe. She says that it's really cool that Stallone contributed to kind of pushing the film to be like the comics, and says that it does look and feel like the comics more so than the others, the 2012 version. And that it is really fascinating to me, because I don't know when you tell me what your thoughts are, but when we watched the film, I loved the look. I loved the look of the film, even for the graphics of 1995. I think even now, back and rewatching them, there's a lot of style and grit and fun, neo-dystopian stuff, that's going on there. That felt pulled straight from a comic book. It really, I think, captured that quite well. The thing that really kind of didn't work for me was Stallone, ironically, given that he's one pushing for so much stuff. He just felt like it was just so hammy. So I'm wondering, what was your experience when you're sitting there in the cinema? I'm assuming you went to the cinema to see it. Sitting in the cinema watching it for the first time. Really interesting backgrounds. Looking great. But then you have this introduction to Dredd that is quite hammy. Did you feel that was in line with the character, or did you was it a sinking moment? What was that like for you?
We saw a preview of it at Marble Arch, cinema in Marble Arch in London, next to Hyde Park, and it was a preview screening, and the 95 film starts with the doom scroll at the start, with James Earl Jones doing the voiceover.
Yes,
that's right. I love that.
And he goes, the year is blah blah blah, and everybody in the audience laughed in derision at that, and it's like second one of the film, and you've lost the audience instantly in that opening moment with this. Here's our doom scroll version of the future.
Oh wow!
And I just went, wow,
right.
Okay.
Even back then.
Yeah. But then, once you get past the doom scroll, and then it's like, it's Fergie's being brought back from prison, and you come into land, you get the flyover of the city, and, the babe in the swimming pool on the rooftop, and it's looking amazing. And then he's thinking, where am I going to be staying? And it comes into land, and he's like dumped in the place, and there's block walls kicking off. It looks amazing. I mean, the production design, which I think is Nigel Phelps from memory, is great. And they had so many people working on it, because it was made in the UK, so many people had all grown up reading 2000 AD. They're all Judge Dredd fans, so you can feel the love in the production design and the look of it. And you've got people like Chris Halls, now Chris Cunningham, who did he did Mean Machine, and he did worked on the ABC Warrior Robot, who drawn painted strips for me in the magazine before he went off to make music videos for Bjork and Madonna and all the rest, and Aphex Twin. So he'd worked on Alien 3, and then he came and did comics for us, and then he went and worked on the Dredd film. And so absolutely the look of it's amazing. And then you have the block war sequence, and then Dredd rides up on the Lawmaster, which is a bit junky. The motorcycle doesn't quite work. They couldn't quite finesse it. And actually, even in the Carl Urban film, I don't like a motorcycle, but there's not much of it, so it doesn't matter, whereas you get it a lot in the film. And the stunt driver who was riding it, the reason why you have it in slow-mo is because the next moment the stunt driver stuck it underneath one of the tanks. Because he crashed about a millisecond later because the thing was such a bastard to ride around. It was totally impractical as a motorcycle. They really struggled to get footage of it. If you get more than a 3-second shot of the motorcycle in normal speed, it's unusual in that film because the thing was so. But yeah, and then he gets off the motorcycle, and it's like he gets off with the wrong foot first. It always fascinates me, which boot is he standing in here? And then we see whoever it was Versace who designed the version of the costume with the codpiece. So you scroll up past the codpiece that he's wearing, because he's not wearing the leather outfit as in the Carl Urban version. He's wearing like lycra, and then with accoutrement with bits stuck on, which is the Versace version. And then again, it was Stallone who insisted they keep putting more of the original costume onto the Versace costume. Was it Armani or Versace, whoever it was, anyway. And then the little microphone cups up in front of his face, so he looks like Captain Scarlet at that moment. And then he says the famous line, but because he does it in this Stallone accent, it sounds like Inspector Clouseau from the Bronx. It's like, again, another big laugh in the audience at that point.
No.
So yeah, I mean, I love Stallone, and I love Stallone in a lot of things, and he was necessary in order to get the money to make the film, to make it look as good as it did, and all the rest. But he's not necessarily one of the strengths. I mean, the real problem is the script when you boil it right down to it. That's where it all starts going sideways. But there are other issues. I mean, Danny Cannon was a very young director. He certainly didn't have Final Cut. So there's a lot of people interfering in the edit suite, I'm sure. The effects were running late, so that, limited as they were at the time, they were still running late. You didn't have 1,000 special effects shops around the world that could do this sort of work. It was like 2 places, and they didn't have ILM working on it. Whatever it was, Mass Effect, whatever they were called, Massachusetts something. So they were up against it in many, many ways. But it's a flawed film. There's lots to like about it, mostly visuals. Yes. But story and some of the performances, and Rob Schneider. Oy.
So that's interesting. So you didn't like Rob Schneider. So actually, extra context. So I had never seen the original Dredd film until like 2 weeks ago. As a kid, I vividly remember it coming out. I vividly remember the trailers. I have a little action figure of it behind me, and the little robot guy. But I'd never seen it. For some reason, it was one of those 90s, action movies that I never saw, despite saying RoboCop and Terminator and all the others. Dredd just completely didn't get in front of me. So, watching it for the first time the other day, I kind of liked Rob Schneider, and I I don't know why, and I don't know if it's because I didn't know what to expect, and then I knew literally nothing, but I'd already seen the Carl Urban version, and I'd kind of known, from film history that the original Dredd is, considered not great. So I don't know if that kind of changed my expectations, but for some reason I found myself laughing quite a bit with Schneider's jokes. But yeah, so what was it for him that didn't work for you?
I mean, for me, it's a tonal issue. Effectively, it's
Yeah.
what is this film trying to be? Because Stallone is playing it absolutely straight and dramatic,
Straight for
lashing
Stallone.
of occasional tragedy. Rob Schneider's playing it as comic relief sidekick. You know, he's like Donkey to Shrek. It's the sort of dynamic that he's playing with.
Yeah.
And Stallone is not playing Shrek. And so the consequence of that is, I mean, Rob Schneider. I find it quite a little bit of a one-note performance. He's doing his shtick, and he's consistently doing it regardless of the situation. So it's a lot of shrieking and running and "You're a lot of fun to be with, Dredd," and all this sort of thing. And you know, if you compare that to say Diane Lane, who's playing Hershey in it, or you've got Max von Sydow or Jürgen Prochnow, or let's not talk about Armand Asante, who's, you know, chewing the scenery like a good one. And Joan Chen, who's just wasted in this film. But yeah, so it's like tonally Rob Schneider's in a different film from pretty much everybody else. And that's why it sits a little weird for me. Whereas if you're enjoying Rob Schneider's performance, then chances are everybody else is going to seem like they've wandered into the wrong film. For me, it's the other way around.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you.
That's a taste thing.
Yeah, no, but I do completely agree with you though. Like in terms of the tone of the film, and again, this very well is probably because I knew going in that it's not a great film, you know. So therefore, when I go in, I'm like, well, I'm expecting cheesiness. So therefore, the cheese is, you know, is not so offensive, maybe. But yeah, the tonal shift was fascinating because the thing is, while I was laughing at Rob Schneider and also laughing at Stallone, I was finding myself really enjoying the character of Hershey. And there was a part of me as we were watching it that I was like, I just kept feeling, you know what? Get rid of Dredd, get rid of Rob Schneider. Like, tell me, I want the film from her perspective because she seemed to be the smartest person in the room the whole time. And I did find that quite fascinating, and it made me wonder, you know, how did the script, you know, you're saying earlier it was kind of a hodgepodge of different ideas and things like that, but why did anyone sit down and read the script and say, hey, Dredd is kind of an idiot this whole time, and Hershey's the only one who is clever, but she's gone for such a huge portion of the film, either A, duo them up better, or clever up Dredd.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, Dredd as a character is not the world's greatest detective, generally speaking. And certainly in the film, he's certainly not the world's greatest detective, despite being a policeman. You know, he's at the enforce the law, not solve the crime kind of thing. So he's not, it's just like, I'm always frustrated with Batman. I would enjoy Batman comics more if he did more being a detective myself rather than, you know, toys and gadgets and all the rest. So I think, I mean, I've always had an affection for Diane Lane. She can be in anything, and I've never seen her give a bad performance in anything. She always classes up the joint when she turns up. So it's great casting to have her in it. And you know, and Max von Sydow's great in it for what he gets to do. So it's got a good cast. It's just
it does.
It's like a load of pieces that don't quite fit together and missed opportunities, and they go in directions, and it's just like, does it quite?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a frustrating film because you can feel there's a better film crying out to escape from it sometimes.
Yeah,
I think so, and I think that's a good point. You know, when you mentioned that you know Dredd is not he's not the Sherlock Holmes of the story. I think it would have been a much smarter choice to, you know, push Rob Schneider's character out of the frame and have those two duo be the dynamic duo, as it were, for that film, because like Kersey Joe saying, I liked Diane Lane's character a lot, and I was disappointed when she vanished, really happy when she came back, but then just very disappointed also that she didn't have more to do. And
plus, of course, the gratuitous kiss at the end, which is like, oh no, come on,
that came out of nowhere.
Came out of that. Well, that was in reshoots. They did reshoots, and they put the kiss in, and Fergie being alive at the end. He was supposed to die heroically in Saving Dredd or something, and then they did reshoots to have him carried past on the stretcher, which I think must have been shot in LA because the lighting is completely different. Suddenly going, that seems anyway. Hey ho.
Yeah. Barry, hello Barry. Barry, who's in the crowd, says Stallone was disappointed with the film. He says, "What I learned from the experience was that we shouldn't have tried to make it Hamlet. It was more Hamlet and eggs."
Yeah, and I think he's right, because it was they were definitely going for sort of like Sturm and Drang and big drama and tragedy and being stripped of his stuff and kicked out and sent away. So it was like a sort of Roman epic tragedy. You know, it was like a version of Gladiator before we had Gladiator, but with a comedy sidekick. You know, it would be like if you stuck Adam Sandler as the sidekick for Maximus in Gladiator.
I love that.
Oh, I have that in my head now, and it's strange.
I mean, that was one of the other many things that I found so bizarre about watching this film was how it went from, we're in Mega City 1, they're, doing some crime stopping. Suddenly this guy breaks out of jail, frames Dredd. He's out in the wilderness, suddenly comes back after fighting some mutants. Suddenly you're in a lab and there's clones and there's
the whole clone thing, which is done in like 5 seconds.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
that whole sequence is like, there's somewhere there's like another 10 minutes of plot somewhere on a floor, somewhere with all that stuff with the which get introduced and then just we'll just blow it up and we'll run away. It's like, what?
Yep.
And either they never shot it and that's why they just had to cut around it, or they just went, this looks like shit and we can't use it, or they were up against something happened. I mean, it's not. I don't know if you've ever seen the Avengers film with Ray Fiennes and Uma Thurman and Sean Connery, which is wow, you should find. I mean, it's hard to find, but I hardly recommend. If you want to watch a car crash, then that makes the '95 Dredd film look like The Godfather Part 2. Honestly.
Oh yeah.
Ouch.
And
that's the one where Sean Connery
so promisingly, and it just goes, what the earth happened here?
Is that the one where Sean Connery dresses as a bear, like a teddy bear?
Yeah, he dresses up in a giant teddy bear outfit. Yeah,
Okay.
Amongst others.
That's the only part I've seen. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing film because if you want tonal lurching, that's all over the shop. Anyway, there we go.
Go on.
Yeah, so we went to the preview screening, and we came out and went, well, it looked good, and there were bits we liked, but you kind of knew that we were on a slight hiding to nothing. Stallone refused to do any of the premieres because he could smell the whiff coming off.
Right.
He refused to do the New York Toy Fair, which is why Mattel cancelled most of the toy line that they had spent millions preparing, but he wouldn't do the Toy Fair to pimp it out. So most of the toy line got cancelled.
So does that mean the figure I have is one of one of the rare few that got out?
I think it was like the little figures, but there was going to be big, large figures, and they never happened as a consequence.
Yeah, these are the ones I got.
Yeah.
You know?
So that was.
I don't know why he's green.
Yeah, past that. And then it was sort of like there was a big UK premiere, and it was Radio 1 did all sorts of tie-ins. There was a Leicester Square premiere. There was a massive party at City Halls afterwards. That went on till God knows what in the morning. There was like Judge Dredd branded taxis all over London. I mean, it was huge. Wow. The amount of money they spent on it was massive. And it did quite well in the UK. In America, it came 49th in the box office for the year, one below the Goofy movie. Not quite so much. I mean, made 35 million in America, but with Stallone, it did like 120 worldwide. So it still lost money for people, but it could have been a lot worse.
It could have been. It could have been. So I mean, that was watching that film was an interesting experience to say the least. So then jumping forward then to 2012,
Yeah.
they're doing the next Dredd film, or the next Dredd film is coming out rather. Based on previous experience with Dredd, what were your thoughts and feelings of 2012 before it came out?
Yeah, I mean, I stopped working at 2000 AD in the year 2000. I had some still involvement off and on over the years after that, but I wasn't in the know as to what was going on with it. You hear things, of course. But I mean, Carl Urban seemed like great casting, and the fact that he was also a fellow Kiwi, so that's always a win as far as I'm concerned. And he was he'd grown up reading 2000 AD. He was absolutely hat stays on people. So you go, okay, all right, we're starting from a good place. It's not about, superstar. Because they were talking about Jason Statham at one point. And he was, because I remember I was at an event and it was Andrew McDonald, who's one of the producers of it, because he's from DNA, who'd worked on Trainspotting and what have you, with Danny Boyle and John Hodge. And he was one of the producers of the 2012 Dredd film. And I remember talking to him, and he said that I think this was like late 2000s in the aughts, and they were talking to, I think, Statham at that point. I think Statham wanted, I don't know, 3 million, 7 million, whatever his price was slightly too much, because I think that they made that film for like 25 million or something. I mean, chicken feed by comparison to what was spent on that was like probably Stallone's trailer budget for the first film. But yeah, I mean, you had Alex Garland writing it, who had a good track record at that point, and the people who were making it had a lot of like the owners of 2018 Judge Dredd by that point Rebellion had a lot of involvement with it and were a lot more hands-on. I mean, the first Dredd film, they employed quite a few artists from 2018 to work in the production shop and the creation and concept design, and that was also true of the 2012 version. And I know John Wagner was a lot happier with the script of 2012 than he ever was with the full Hollywood version from 1995. So that all seemed very promising. So the vibe seemed good. I mean, it was going to be a much smaller scale story because the budget said it had to be smaller scale, shot in South Africa, if memory serves. And the weird thing is, I mean, for me, visually, the weakest part of the film is the first 5 to 10 minutes. Once they get into the block, then it's completely credible as a Judge Dredd film. It's just that opening 5 to 10 minutes where it's, there's some small amount of special effects, but it's it's just normal, like people in a normal van, in a normal 20th century van driving, or 21st century van driving. The road scenes didn't feel very Judge Dredd. So that for me was my one sadness about that film, really, in terms of the visuals. Just the opening seemed a little ordinary and mundane, whereas the rest felt very Judge Dredd. And of course, for me, the great thing of that is the slow-mo, the drug slow-mo, and the visuals that they used to create that was, really helped elevate it. I think the Dredd film is actually one of only 2 films I've actually bothered to go and see at the cinema in 3D.
Yes. I think they pushed it really hard with 3D, though, didn't they?
You really struggled to find a non-3D screening of it in the UK at the time it came out. It was 3D or nothing, effectively. And if you're a glasses wearer, then 3D is like, oh, I'm going to wear 2 pairs of glasses. Yay! That's really
it's always a struggle.
It's not nice. Yeah. It's not nice. Do you think? Because earlier you're mentioning that Dredd has such similarities with RoboCop. When we were watching 2012, I think Phil, you actually said, or maybe it's Kirsty Joe, she watched it with us, that there was a sort of RoboCop 1987 RoboCop vibe to the original, to the opening of the new Dredd. I was wondering, were they toning it down, the cities and that stuff? Were they toning it down to offset it and make it as different as possible from Stallone's, given that Stallone's was so bad?
Maybe. I mean, they spent so much of a lot of money in the Stallone film to do this incredible design. I mean, the street sets that they had at, I think it was Shepperton. I can't It's shipping anyway because we were taken on a tour while they were filming the confrontation between Stallone's Dredd and the Angel Gang, and he was suspended from the ceiling and all the rest. And we went on a tour of the streets, and it was amazing. It was it was only 2 stories high, which is why whenever you see anybody outside in the Stallone film and they look up at the helmet, you could see where it stops, and they didn't special effects the rest of the city above a foot, 1.5 stories, and then it's like, oh, it's just sky after that. So yeah, I think there was a clear sense that they wanted to differentiate it from the Stallone film, which is why the costume's much more practical. It's much more credible as to how all of that's going to work. They've very much hewed to the vision of the comic for the largest part. It's very much in the keeping with the comic, whereas the Stallone film was sort of like a halfway house between the comic and an original vision of what they wanted to do with it.
So yeah, Kersey Joe asks, so how true to story from the comics are either film? Which one is closer, would you say?
They both are to a large extent. The first one is a mashup of several different storylines, and it's a little bit of a Frankenstein's monster, as I said before, as a consequence. Whereas the second one is completely credible as a Dredd film. You could have easily imagined that being done in a comic, and it would probably be about 6 episodes long and 36 pages. Really, there's not actually that much story to it. It's a very long action sequence. Dredd doesn't go on anything that resembles an arc as a character in that film, which is kind of the mistake of what they made with the first film, to have him go on a redemptive arc and to learn and come back and do it. And the second one, they go, no, fuck it. Dredd does not go on a journey of change. Dredd is the agent of change. He turns up, he shoots people, he leaves. He's Clint Eastwood. He's the man with no name. He's the guy in the motorcycle that's going to turn up and shoot you and then leave once he's done his job. So he doesn't change. Anderson's character has the journey of change. So she is our identification character. She is our empathy character. Dredd, we're just cheering him on, shoot more people, because that's the kind of character that he is. And that's fine. So... yeah, the story is relatively straightforward, and I remember at the time there was a lot of sort of everybody pointing to the fact that the 2012 Dredd film and the film The Raid essentially have basically the same plot, which is just a coincidence. It is purely coincidental. It's like it's a cop who has to get to the top of a building and get back down again. That's it. That's the plot. But that's a classic there and back again narrative.
Yes.
But it's very effective. It does what it says on the tin. It's a shame it didn't get much more of a, it didn't get a better release or a wider release in the US. That it kind of dropped and disappeared, just sank without track.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said at the end of watching the movie. I was just like, I'm just so disappointed that this never got a sequel, never got another one.
And it's,
it was the saddest thing.
And they sold so many DVDs when DVDs was still a film. They made so much money from the ancillaries, far more than they made from the film. So it got to the point where they were getting close to, I think, getting towards making enough money out of it to think about a sequel. But instead they've been working on the Mega City 1 TV series. That's been in development for, I guess, 5 years now. That's still happening.
That's still a thing?
I don't know. I know that there's been scripts written. They've had people like Rob Williams and other writers from the comics have worked on it. But it's development hell. That's just the nature of these things. They have been or they don't.
Yeah. No, I did. I thoroughly enjoyed Dredd 2012. I sort of feel that possibly one of the big things that might have held it back was 3D. 3D films at the time, way more expensive than your standard 2D. Also, I kind of don't like 3D at all. I was just saying, like, the glasses thing, a bit of a nauseous feeling sometimes when you're watching the 3D. It never really worked for me that well, so I kind of avoided. I saw Dredd on DVD. That's how I watched it. I didn't go to the cinema to see it. But the thing is, I was when I finally sat down and watched it, I did. I loved it. I loved the Raid comparison, the there and back again. I thoroughly enjoyed the character of Anderson. I thought it was fascinating that both the Dredd movies have really cool female sidekicks, who have a lot of agency, despite Diane Lane having 10 minutes of screen time or less. She steals the show for me. She stole the show for the first one. But I loved Anderson. I loved her journey. How that sort of, I love that bit when he's like, he knows that she's not ready. But then later on he's like, no, you're ready. And you really sense her change. And I thought, comparing the two, the character arc and following her character arc, which is what we're doing, is I found that to be way better, obviously, than the first one. And I was fine with Dredd kind of maintaining Dreadness, up until the end. There is that little bit, where his Dredd's boss asks him if she's a pass or a fail, and he says she's a pass, even though she's broken the rules and didn't follow protocol, stuff like that.
It should be a straight fail. Yeah.
But and so it's just the smallest amount of insight into Dredd, I think, in that film. But
because there's a moment I think it's about halfway through where Anderson interrogates the guy that they've been around for most of the film, finds out the information they need to know, and uses her powers against him, and then Dredd goes, impressive. And it's and that's the turning point. You go, oh, actually no, she's going to make mistakes, but she's a useful asset, and she's a useful tool to have around, and it changes his attitude, because he starts, in the film version they make she's a mutant, which is how she has psychic abilities and able to do things. And and as far as Dredd's concerned, well, mutants should be out in the cursed earth, and that's the end of the story. And he sees, oh no, she's useful to help me do my job, so therefore she's worth having. She's like, oh, it's good. Right. It's another kind of bullet I have available to me now.
Do you think either film would have benefited from trying to incorporate some of the oppression or anti-democracy messaging from the earlier comics, or was that just too, because that takes away from Dredd being the hero, just not practical enough?
It's tricky. If you're going to tell that story, you have to tell that story. Yeah. You might be able to do it thematically about elements of it, and they sort of allude to it a little bit in the Carl Urban version. Mm-hmm. It's like the guy who's sat underneath the door, and Dredd's like, if you're here when I get back, 3 years in the cubes. And when they come back and the guy's still there, and then he gets crushed by the door, and that's the end of him. So there's a vague hand wave towards a democracy element, and the judges as a police force. But the reality is that Dredd's massively out and Anderson are massively outgunned, so they don't feel like much of a police force when, there's only two of them against, 70,000 people in a building, and most of whom are better armed. So I think if you're going to tell that story, it has to be its own story. And then if you are going to tell that story, it was always the argument. I remember when they were working on the Stallone film, was like, we're holding Judge Dredd back to the second film. You don't go straight to Moriarty in film one. You have to establish the character in the world, and then you bring in the supervillain. So, and it was the same with the Carl Urban film. They were like, we're holding Judge Dredd back. You have to establish Dredd as in his own right before you bring in the Joker, because otherwise you end up with Jack Nicholson, who's Batman. So you have to do the straight version before you then start to twist what it is. And I think the same will be true of democracy. You have to establish the world before you can then say, oh, by the way, this is a fascist regime and this should be brought down. Because otherwise then it stops being a Dredd story. It becomes Judge Dredd in America, effectively. You're telling the small person, the individual person's point of view of what life is like in the fascist police state that is Mega City 1. Which is, if you haven't read it, there's an amazing graphic novel called America, and it's street level life of a citizen in Mega City 1. Oh, there we go. So yes.
There we go.
And that's how you tell a democracy story, I would suggest. But to do that, you shifting the point of view. It's not a Dredd story. It's a story where Dredd turns up and he's a bully and a fan and an oppressor.
Yes, yes. Chief Brody Rules has just informed us that it apparently is the 10th anniversary of Dredd
Of the well, there
this
you go.
week.
That sounds about right. Oh,
That's
God, yeah,
pure.
it is
Sounds about right.
because I was in San Francisco in 2012 at the end of the US Open, which is when Andy Murray, sorry, random factoid, won his first major. He won the US Open, and I remember
Yep.
watching it. And there was a billboard for the Dredd film I saw on top of a building in San Francisco, and it must have just been about to come out at that point.
Yeah.
I must have seen one of the few billboards in the whole of America for that film.
So Pathfinder wants me to mention he was responding to on Twitter, talking about on Twitter about tonight's conversation, and he tagged the director Duncan Jones, the director of Moon and other films, who apparently is working on a Rogue Trooper film apparently, and so Pathfinder wants me to mention that.
Yeah.
He was excited because he tweeted Duncan's video from like 2017 hinting at what he wanted to do, and then Duncan replied saying have faith, implying that potentially there is hope for that project. I know nothing about this, so I can't say anything more than that, but I just wanted to mention that for old Pathfinder.
Yeah. Well, no, Duncan is a massive 2008 fan.
Yes.
Notoriously so. And he did, because he filmed a promo in 2017 where he'd shaved his head to give himself the Rogue Trooper mohawk. And I think even dyed his skin blue, possibly, or put some blue makeup on to fully embrace the effect. I mean, Rogue Trooper, another classic 2008 character that could make a great film.
Yeah.
We live in
Maybe
hope.
One day.
Maybe one day. I mean, development hell. I think a lot of things like the Mega City 1 TV series, which is sort of like a version of Gotham Central. It's like the Hill Street Blues version of Dredd, I think is the vision of it, with a sector house and all the rest, there's a great Dredd serial called The Pit that John Wagner wrote, which does that sort of Hill Street Blues version of Dredd, where Dredd's a character, but he's not the star of the show necessarily, and you get to see what life is like if you're a run-of-the-mill judge rather than the epic that is Dredd. So I think there's a lot of these projects. I mean, COVID has not done a lot for film and television production in the last 3 years, as we said, which is why there's such a dearth of new content in cinemas at the moment. Yes.
Well, maybe one day in the near future we will start getting some more Judge Dredd content on the big or small screen. I would be happy to see some more stuff. I mean, I would still love a Carl Urban sequel. I doubt that will ever happen. But I feel like maybe with his star power now with The Boys,
Yeah, I mean, The Boys can't keep going forever. He's on a spoiler alert after the last series, Billy's on a short fuse now, so.
Yes. Or we'll see if they write a way to get around
equally,
that.
There are superpowers, so anything has a solution.
Exactly. Cool. So, any other remaining thoughts on Dredd, Phil? David?
Me?
Audience?
I had something in my head and it just dropped off. I had something in my head and I forgot. I got distracted. I apologize.
So Frank said, Chief Brody Rules said that Dredd opened at number 5 in the States. House in the Street, End of Watch, probably with the curve, and Finding Nemo released 3D, we're top 4. Yeah, I mean, I wasn't in the States when this came out, but I just remember everything being 3D, and there was really no other way to see anything at that time, except in 3D.
Blame Avatar for that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, which...
it's coming back, baby.
That's coming back to haunt us again.
Literally, just won't go away.
I know. I saw a trailer for it on TV, and I was going, "Oh, geez!" I thought it was a trailer for the new one, and I was going, "Oh, this dialogue yaks." But no, it's a re-release of Dances with Smurfs. So
yes,
yep. Some Pocahontas in there.
Yeah. I am not excited for that re-release. I am not excited for Avatar 2.
The 4 more films to come. Yay!
The 4 more films, yeah. Sounds great.
That's a lot.
I've had them
That's a lot.
too much.
Wow. Okay.
Too much, I think.
Too much.
So, David, obviously, anyone in the chat, if you have any questions, now is the time to start dropping them in. But what are you working on now? Because obviously, Dredd was a fair few years ago for you, working on with 2000 AD, etc. What's happening?
So I'm where is it? I'll grab one of these. So now I write these. Hold up. Historical thrillers set in Renaissance Florence, and my investigator is a guy called Cesare Aldo, who, well, certainly in the first book, takes a kicking and keeps on ticking. There's a slightly now I'm thinking about there's a slightly Dredd-like element to his ability to have the ever-loving storm beating out of him and get back up again off the deck. Not quite comical in the first one, but he does take quite the beatings. I've had to rein in my tendency to torture my characters in subsequent books. It's the old, I think what's it called? It was a thing that went around, there was a meme that went around years ago when everybody was writing Star Trek Next Generation fanfic, which was hurt him, nurture him. So everybody would write these stories about, Riker or Picard, and he would be trapped on some planet and he would be tortured, and then their Mary Sue character would come and nurture the Enterprise crew member back to good health, basically. So I've got a slight tendency to do that. So it's the City of Vengeance is out in paperback, and that's about this one is a conspiracy thriller, but in Renaissance Florence with the Medici.
Wonderful.
And then number 2 is out now in hardback, is The Darkest Sin, and that is a locked room mystery set in a convent full of nuns, and then the dead, naked body of a man that's been stabbed 27 times and is covered in blood is found in the scriptorium, and how could he have died in a convent? And really could one of the nuns be a killer? And I've just handed in book 3 in the series, and it's coming out next summer, and it's called Ritual of Fire, and it features somebody is burning people to death.
Oh gosh, love it.
So book 3 is a vendetta during a heat wave, where people are being burned to death in public in grotesque manners. So that's number 3.
That's exciting stuff. So what? Okay, let's go to Cursey Joe's question, but then we're gonna just touch on your books a little bit more. So Cursey Joe says, what project have you completed that has given you the most enjoyment, and why?
Oh golly, I mean, there's several. There's I've written 4 Doctor Who novels, but one of them was basically my Marvel's version of the Doctor Who universe. So it would be, what would life be like if you were living in London during the John Pertwee Third Doctor era, when Earth was being invaded every other week?
Mental.
Basically. And it was like an investigative journalist who's trying to find out. He thinks UNIT is the shadowy organization with some sort of secret paramilitary funding, and nobody knows what's going on. And who is this mysterious figure called the Doctor who keeps appearing in history, but with different pieces? Is it just a name, or is it a real person? So there's a book called Who Killed Kennedy, and it all ends up with, in Dallas 1963, basically, is the big finish of that.
Nice.
So that's that. I found that very satisfying to write, and it's my best reviewed Doctor Who project I've ever written on, basically. So that's one of my favourites. I've written nearly 50 issues of The Phantom, and there's several in there. I invented a character called the Pirate Queen, who ended up being a recurring character in the Phantom story universe that ran for 10 years. So that's always fun when you can contribute something to the mythos of a long-established character like that. And then really, actually, it's shameless, but the current books. So when I've done a lot of, because I've written so much tie-in stuff over the years for different characters, and then I wrote for TV, I wrote for a series on BBC One called Doctors, which runs as a medical drama series that runs during the day. So there again, you write a story of the day, but then you have all the continuing drama soap elements around it. So I spent a lot of my career writing other people's stories and other people's characters. So to finally get to write my own characters and my own stories that I've invented of myself is probably the most satisfying thing.
Yes.
So yeah, so
Absolutely.
yeah, City of Vengeance and the books I'm writing now is it's making me happy. So that's good.
So what
Always
inspired
good.
you, having worked with Dredd and Doctor Who and Heroes and the Phantom? What inspired you to go to historical fiction, historical crime fiction?
Um, I mean, I was in a secondhand, or I think it was a remainder bookshop around the corner from the British Museum. This is in the late 90s. This is how long ago I started on this journey. And
Wow.
I just randomly picked up a book which was somebody's monograph. It was basically their PhD thesis, which had been published as a monograph. And it was about the criminal justice system in late Renaissance Florence. And I went, they had a criminal justice system in late Renaissance? News to me. And I opened it up at this page, and it said the criminal justice system was roughly comparable to a modern police force. And I went, ooh.
Right.
Because
Right.
one of the most formative experiences of my youth was watching Hill Street Blues when it was broadcast in the early 1980s, which was sort of like the sprawling cast, multi-epic cop show. But it did cop shows in a way that had never been done before. In that it continuing storylines, and the characters were all deeply flawed, and there was humor and there was tragedy. It really ran the gamut. It did so many things, and so many great writers of the following 30 years of American television, David Milch and Stephen Bochco, and the list goes on. I got their start, or sort of rose to prominence through Hill Street Blues. So the idea that you could do Hill Street Blues, but set in Renaissance Florence, was like, yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to do that. That sounds great.
Sounds rad.
But then I spent 20 years researching it around other jobs because I was terrified of messing it up effectively. I wanted to do the best possible job of it, so I had to wait until I was ready to have a go at it. And then over that time, my central character of Cesare Aldro evolved. So the thing that defines him is the fact that he's a gay man at a time and place in history where that's punishable by death. And yet he works for the most feared criminal court in the city. So he enforces the laws, and yet he's a criminal in the eyes of the law. So you have that duality always going on, that he's presenting one face in public and another in private.
Yes.
Who can he trust? So he's your classic noir outsider.
Yes.
In that he's, presenting a series of masks to the world, and he has to hide his true identity, and he's a criminal and yet a lawman at the same time. So that combination of factors in the setting where you have, the great thing about Renaissance Florence is you have like the flowering of art and architecture and science are all happening, are basically being recreated or reborn at that point in history. We're emerging from the Dark Ages. And modern history is being built right there in one city. And yet it's the same city that gives you The Prince by Machiavelli, and backstabbing and poisoning and conspiracy. So you have Beauty and the Beast at the same time. So it's this one that you can do anything in this setting, really.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, frankly, I'm contracted to write 4 books. So 3 I've handed in for next year. 4 I'll be working on starting probably the end of this year, the start of next year, to come out in 2024. And honestly, I could comfortably write another 4 or 8 books after that, and I still would be scratching the surface of all the stories I could tell. So, yeah. Plus, I love series fiction, and I love returning to characters and seeing them grow and develop and learning more about them over time. And I think it's why I tend to prefer serial storytelling, so television over film often, because film, a great film is amazing, but it feels a little bit like a really amazing one night stand. Whereas you're always going to love it; it's going to be a brilliant memory, but it was just a one-off. Whereas if it's a relationship, then it can grow and evolve and go to new places.
It's very true. I mean, I'm
Very
currently
well said.
Yeah, we're currently rewatching Next Generation, Star Trek Next Generation, and I love it. It's been so great just revisiting these seven great seasons. We're halfway through season 6, and I very much like the serialized storytelling. I think it's great. Pathfinder. Go on.
If I'd ever gotten to write a Star Trek novel, the Star Trek novel I wanted to write was Wolf 359. I wanted to write the battle that happens in between the Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and Part 2. But I wanted to write it as basically from here to eternity. It's Pearl Harbor, in the Starfleet. You have all these characters, and most of them are going to die. So it's basically, it is just Pearl Harbor in space, effectively, is what Wolf 359 could be. And you've got Cisco, of course, and his son.
Yes.
They would be characters who would be in it. So it's like the prequel story, it's the origin story of Cisco.
Cisco, right there. There he is.
Yeah.
I also have the Cisco behind me. Oh, he's also back there from the episode where they go back in time to the Enterprise, the Tribbles episode.
Yes.
I can't remember the
More
title of it now. Yes. No, I think that is a terrific idea. I think someone needs to let you write that story because I love that. There was the opening of Deep Space Nine where we get that brief glimpse of that fight was terrific, and you could do so much. That would be.
Yeah, and the thing is, aside from Cisco and his son, everybody else can die. So therefore,
exactly
anybody can die at any moment in that story, which gives you complete jeopardy, so you can go anywhere with it, which is great.
I love that.
So yeah, I'd love to do that. Yeah, the pilot of Deep Space Nine. I love the first 5 minutes, and then we get to the bit where characters saying, "What is time?" Ugh.
Yes, I mean, Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek series. I love it, but I'm aware that most of season 1 into season 2 is hard.
Still figuring out how to do the job. Yeah.
Yes, it's very tricky. I love it, but I mean, once you get to season 3, the thing about, and I guess Next Generation is kind of the same. The first 2 seasons are really rough around the edges, but season 3 onwards, I feel remain quite strong. I think Deep Space Nine. This is now Star Trek chat, by the way. I feel Deep Space Nine struggled with its final season mainly because it tried to bring back Dax, and they just should have left Dax gone. I think I love Ezri mostly. She's kind of annoying at times, but I think trying to relearn Dax in one last season hampered a lot of the. Yeah.
Well, I've got a terrible affection for season 1 of Voyager, which is just buttons. Most of it is just utter bobbins. But any show that features the line "Get that cheese to sickbay," just win points as far as I'm concerned. I mean, honestly. Anyway, sorry, we've gone off topic ever so slightly.
It's all right. We're having a Star Trek chat in a few weeks, but we will have more, and we'll have to bring you back on for Star Trek chats because I'm cautiously optimistic about the 3rd season of Picard.
Okay, all right. Good luck with
that. I know season 1 or 2 are not good at all, in my opinion. Don't know what you guys think. I don't like them. I think they're terrible. But there was a particular reviewer fella who has been very critical of Star Trek this whole time, but has seen the new season of Picard and has praised it quite a lot, and recently had the showrunner on his YouTube channel, and it was the first time I was listening to a current Star Trek showrunner where I thought, hey, this guy actually respects and understands the franchise a little bit more than some of the other fellas and people who are currently in charge. But I'm hopeful that this 3rd season will just be a nice fresh start. There's been a lot of hints that seasons 1 and 2 of Picard don't really matter in this 3rd season, which is probably a good thing. But
is season 2 the one where it's Q and then they're all in an alternate universe for the whole thing? Which is just, I mean, it's classic. I mean, I read a Doctor Who novel called The Domino Effect, which was a whole series of alternate history novels. And the problem was at the end of every one, there was just a big red reset button. And then, well, you didn't need to have bothered with that because it was just an alternate history that doesn't exist now. And like, well, then thanks for wasting my time with that. It is really frustrating when it seems cool, but the reality is you are just writing something which doesn't exist. I mean, even in the context of the fictional world that you're making shit up in, even within the context of the fiction, it's still fiction that doesn't matter. So,
Yes. Yeah.
So,
that is unfortunately what season 2 was. It was Q. It really didn't make any sense. It was at the beginning, the Borg show up through a wormhole. But the ship, Picard blows the ship up. Go on.
Yeah, I just remember it. I watched the first episode of season 2. I thought, okay. I watched the first episode of season 1 of Picard and went, yeah. And then I thought, okay, so I'll watch the first episode of season 2. Reboot, let's go. And that was a classic example. I got to the end of the episode and I went, you should have finished by now. Why is this still going? Why have you not got to the place that you're going to? You've just stopped in the middle of the episode. So that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
I now have 10% left on my battery. I should point that out.
Okay.
Oh.
We can wrap up here now.
At some point in the next 10%, I will disagree.
That's fine. Yeah, no, I had a deal with a colleague that I would watch all of Picard season 2, and so we did. And what you said right there was every episode. It would end. The first act was 40 minutes, and it would end when you should be entering Act 2 every time. And it was the most infuriating thing I've seen in a very long time.
Just stop clearing your throat, and could you just not get to the point? It's like, go write some British comics. Let's have some concession, for goodness sakes.
Yes. I should just mention Pathfinder's comment real quick. He says, I'd like to say thanks for some of the great stories in 2000 AD over the years. Chopper of Oz, Slain, Nemesis, to name just a few. Absolutely loved it, and still do.
Nice.
So yeah, good stuff.
Lovely.
This was really fun. I'm glad we could have you on, David, because this was thoroughly enjoyed.
It was a
hanging out
pleasure.
with you.
Here's the drawing. There we go. I don't know what I was doing. It's just Judge Dredd threatening a child. That's all that happened in this entire. That's my frame of thinking, and I have no idea what I was thinking of what he could be saying, and I couldn't think of a line. And if anyone has any suggestions.
I mean, I like it, but I'm just for Dredd. What would Dredd be saying?
Because the other one's just I'm just a kid.
Probably something along the lines of no public urinating.
There we go.
5 years in the Juve cubes for you.
That's good. I love that.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Hey, and your Dredd is a lot more convincing than the Frank Miller Dredd. So.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
If you need a laugh, I highly recommend Google Frank Miller Judge Dredd. And Frank Miller, for the 10th anniversary of Judge Dredd Megazine, one of my colleagues commissioned Frank Miller to do the cover for it, but then was on honeymoon when the cover actually arrived. And John Wagner was actually to go out with lunch with me, and as I opened the package to take out the Frank Miller cover, and John took one look at it and went, "He saw you coming," and because he asked how much Frank was being paid for this cover. If you look it up, you'll see it's a pretty idiosyncratic version of Dredd, I think is the polite description.
It's the rejected cover.
Yes.
Yes, I'm looking at it now, and that is something else.
Yeah. It's a thing. And
I gotta see it. I'm still looking for it. Luke, if you want to just share it.
I mean, it arrived, and I emailed him about Frank Miller and said, might possibly one or two tweaks, and then he was just like, nope. If you don't want to use it as is, then don't use it. And we were like, okay then. So we didn't use it.
All right.
That was the end of that. So
that is one massive foot.
That's a big old boot. I mean, that's with like a weird zebra leg thing going on with the.
Yes. Yep. This is hilarious.
Choices were made.
Choices were indeed made.
Bad choices were made.
Choices.
Yes. Cool. Well, thank you for your time, David. This was great.
Yes,
where can people find you on the internet, on the Twitters and things like that?
My author website is dvbishop.com, all lowercase, of course. And generally, Twitter is probably where I spend most of my time. And I've been on Twitter so long, I have my own name. I am at David Bishop.
There you
Oh,
go.
wonderful.
There you go. There you go. So find David, check out
Fantastic.
his books, check out his comic books, check out everything that he's got to offer. You'll enjoy it. But yeah, cool. Thank you, David. Enjoy the
Thank you
rest of your
so
night,
much.
and yeah, hopefully we'll have you back on in the near future.
Thank you for having me. It's been a joy.
It's been
Cool.
fantastic.
See you later.
Bye.
See ya. Yeah.
Good stuff. That was
Good
a lot of
stuff.
fun. That was a lot of fun.
Definitely was. It definitely was.
Yes, it was. Cool, everyone. Thanks for tuning
It was really
in
cool. It was actually
and
really
hanging
cool
out with us.
hearing all that.
I enjoyed it a lot. Oh, he's okay. Never mind. Yeah, no, that was a lot of fun.
I forgot Oscar the Grouch was in here too.
Where is he? Oh, look at him! Look at him! Look at Oscar the Grouch. Frank says I was getting late and he was getting sleepy. Who? Us? Maybe.
Me? Because
I don't know.
I didn't watch any Star Trek. That's my problem. I'm historically known for not. I've seen a lot of Star Trek myself. I keep saying I'm gonna go and watch Next Generation, and I watch 2 episodes and go, "That's great," and then I don't pick it up again.
I'm really excited because I
Like a
recently
fool.
purchased the directors, the new box set of the original 6 films that have
That's
the
right.
director's editions for the motion picture Wrath of Khan and The Undiscovered Country, and I am so excited to be watching them. Okay, Frank wants to see this Frank Miller thing. Let me see if I can share it without, I don't know, sharing all kinds of stuff. Let me see here, Frank. Okay, just give me a second.
No, give him a second. Give him a second.
Okay, hit share.
Chief Brody Rules says, "What is Phil working on?" He announced he was going to make a new.
Okay, so this is it. This is the Frank Miller sketch that I can't remember what the zoom is, but I'll do this. So I'll do it very slowly, like an old man, But yeah, there you go. Actually, let's see if I go. Here you go. There you go. I've found the command. There you go. That was Frank Miller's rejected Judge Dredd cover. Oh, Frank Miller was sleepy. Gotcha. What? Yes, Frank. I'm here, Frank. I'm here. It's okay. I'm right here. It's all good. What's up, buddy? What's up? Tell me what's up. Coach Joe, really like whatever the graphite pencil effect brush is that you use to draw that. I'm assuming that means
Thank you very much.
Not beardy Judge Dredd.
Yeah, beardy Judge Dredd. Let's get beardy Judge Dredd away from here.
Yes, it is interesting, isn't it? That is a terrible. I mean, it's
that is a terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, the giant size foot reminds me of it. Is it Rob Liefeld who did that insanely Captain America with the giant chest?
Yep.
Like it's like this is that version. This is like that, but with the boot. Like someone show me that skeleton. Chief Brody.
I was gonna answer your question, but Luke was talking.
There we go. All right, answer the question.
What is Phil working on? He announced he was going to make new art content on Twitter. Can he elaborate? Not on Twitter. I was just making a cover for a client for he is doing a piano cover the performance of songs from Spirited Away, and I'm doing the cover for it, and I've done it. His name is Torby Bard, and he I've done like at least 3 of them for him already, so that's nice. And I'm doing a mead label design, which is gonna be cool. And that's my 2 immediate projects right now. Nothing very special, but still exciting nonetheless. Because nothing special for me because I'm kind of used to it. You know what I mean? Sorry, that came out really badly.
All art is special. Yeah, no. Sounds good though. I'm excited to see these some of these projects when you're done.
Thank you.
Yeah, see what's going on.
Pathfinder says Dredd does not have a beard. Also, yeah, today's show was great. I was very happy to meet D.V. Bishop and hear him
Yes.
talk about, especially honestly, I'm not kidding, like just the novels that he was working on.
Yeah, no. David's work is great.
Yeah.
Everyone here, go check out D.V. Bishop's books. He's written under D.V. Bishop and David Bishop. You're not gonna be disappointed. Terrific stuff.
It is.
Yeah, and go follow him on Twitter as well. Yeah,
Oh,
I don't know.
oh, Chief Brody says I was doing other podcasts. No, sorry.
Thanks, Frank.
Working on more posts or something, right? Well, I'm trying to get out of the funk. There's lots of personal reasons why I'm in a funk and why it's really difficult for me to have energy to do anything other than just survive. That sounded really dire.
Boy, that's
Sorry.
just taking the mood down.
Sorry. Sometimes I'm just too honest and I just wear my, wear all the emotions.
He's trying
on
to
my sleeve a little bit.
survive, guys.
But doing stuff, I guess the simplest thing is I just don't have the energy or time to do anything for myself. I think that's it.
Frank says, "Get out of the funk. Get out of the funk. Funk.
I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
Take it one day at a time. One day at a time. Go treat yourself
Treat yourself.
to a burger and
yourself.
fries.
Oh, I would love a burger and fries, especially if it's not from McDonald's. We have lots of really good burgers and fry places here, by the way.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay. So next week, go on,
visit
go on.
Croatia, everybody. Visit Croatia. I'm around. We can hang out.
Wait. So Frank says Phil answered me. That's all. That's what I wanted to hear. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm trying to get back into it. Basically, that's what I was saying on Twitter. Like, I just want to get back into drawing fun stuff and just for fun, which is great because we did it on the podcast. Did a nice little Dredd. I never would have expected to have drawn Dredd in my life before, so that was great. It was good.
It was fun. I thoroughly enjoyed that. I really will have to have we will have to have David back on to chat.
Yeah, for sure.
To chat some Star Trek, even though we're going to be chatting Star Trek in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I'm excited for. So maybe in the next couple of weeks, you can brush up on the basics, right?
So what are the basics?
Well, you just you brush up on the original series. I mean, you've seen all the original films. So
I've seen the original films. I know the vibe. I need the best episodes of, I guess. That would probably be a good idea.
Yeah, sure. Find the top 10 of everything and watch one from every series.
So I'm guessing
right?
from TNG, I just go to Red Letter Media and
I tell you
Mike
what,
is
actually,
just
yeah, if you
those
watch
are the best
their
episodes.
yeah, if you watch their top 10 TNG episodes, those will be good. Because we'll with in a couple weeks we're talking with another writer friend of mine who I work with at Noiser Podcasts.
That's cool.
He also does some Star Trek-y stuff on the side. So we're going to we'll chat about old Trek, new Trek, my interest and growing excitement for Picard Series 3, all because of Robert Meyer Burnett, the post-geek singularity guy. He is because he's been so vehement about not enjoying new Trek like I have. Seeing him genuinely excited for Picard season 3, I'm like, either someone is giving him a lot of money, which I don't think is happening, or it's legitimately good. And I'm really getting the impression that it is legitimately good. Even the ship,
Chief Brody rules. I appreciate that.
Even the ship designs that they showed the other day, I was like, oh my gosh, this looks like a Star Trek ship, and it was so nice to finally see a Star Trek ship. I was like, oh. Even in the short little trailer, I was like, there was all these little references. I was like, that Beverly Crusher is wearing a coat that is reminiscent of Captain Kirk in Wrath of Khan, and there's things from Search for Spock. Then I'm like, oh, Search for Spock, and it's looking good. It's looking good. I think. So Frank says everyone needs to RT Phil's art. Well, Phil, what is your Twitter so the people know to do that?
Phil Dragish at PhilDragash.
There you go. There
Also,
you go.
you can
So
open up the screen share thing.
ah,
I found a nice little Godzilla sketch. There you go.
bum 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 bum
See,
bum
that's a
bum.
character called Miki. I don't know if you've seen enough of. Have you seen all the Heisei era Godzilla movies?
I don't know.
80s and 90s. There's
Probably
Godzilla.
not.
There's Godzilla 84. Then there's Godzilla versus Biollante. Then there's
Seen those.
Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. That's
Yeah,
the
I
one
think
where
I've
they go
seen
through
that
time.
one. Yeah, yes, that one made no sense. Yep, watch that
Yeah, it
one.
was
We
great. I
watched that
love
one
that
actually,
one.
you and I.
Yeah, we did. And then there is Godzilla versus Space Godzilla, Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2, and
Didn't see
unless
those.
I'm missing another one, no, of Godzilla versus Batra, and then Godzilla versus Destoroyah, which
I haven't seen any of those
so
after. Yeah.
the recurring character is Miki here. This character, and she has a psychic link to Godzilla
Yes, I recognize her.
with her big ears. Yes,
Yeah. Oh, bless.
they're very cute. She's very
She's a cute girl. She's not. She's not got like Dumbo ears.
No.
Yes. Okay, so you've drawn her and an old Gojira.
Yeah, I think there's always something special about Godzilla seeing a person, and it's scary, daunting. It's a very intimidating image.
I was thinking earlier. This links to Godzilla and to Dredd.
Godzilla's
when-
a very go on.
Oh, I was when David was mentioning that he likes to tell his stories from the perspective of the people and stuff like that. It did sort of make me feel of a little bit about the 2014 Godzilla and Gareth Edwards. We're not really seeing Godzilla that much because we're seeing it from people's perspective as opposed to big giant monster coming. Which I thought was, I don't know, made me think of that Godzilla film, probably because you like
Yeah.
Godzilla quite a bit.
I do, and I wanted to bring Godzilla up in our conversation when he said that Judge Dredd is very malleable. You could do comedy, you can do that with him, and it's like I wanted to say just like Godzilla.
That you should have done. Why not? Next
I
time.
don't know. I get nervous. I get
So nervous.
It's so weird because like when I was a kid, you get nervous, you get the shakes and stuff like that. But now as an adult, you just are so afraid you're gonna say something wrong, so you don't say anything. Yeah.
Poppycock. Chief Brody Rules says, "Will there be an episode where you play a trivia game and challenge each other?" And
That would be
follows
great.
that up with Phil will win. Phil will win because I am terrible at trivia, even at things that I know stuff about. I am. Yeah, when it comes to a trivia question, I'm like, nope, not gonna happen. I'm not very good at it. As much as I love Star Trek, I would probably fail miserably at a Star Trek trivia game. Probably. I get some questions right, but yeah, I'd probably fail. If someone were to be like, oh, what year did Benjamin Sisko and all those go back in time when they were in the concentrate, not the kind of the dumpy camps in Los Angeles, I'd be like, I don't know. I remember the episode. It's a great episode, but I don't remember the year. Or like, what was his name? Because Sisko becomes a historical figure. I'd be like, I don't know. Can't remember his name.
Right.
But I remember the episode. And I remember that. But yeah, so trivia would not be fun.
Makes sense.
Trivia would not be fun. But next week, apparently, we're talking about Andor.
So we're gonna do that, are we?
I guess so. It's what's written down here, so I guess we're doing it. Should we commit? Should we commit to it? Should we do it?
Sure.
We're
gone
gonna
this far.
discuss the first episode of Andor. What are your expectations? This rich character that we've been dying to see come back.
Well, my expectations, ironic. Like I looked at the trailers and I'm just like, they could do this. Could be okay.
Except what cracks me up is the guy playing Andor. Can't remember his name, but he made the comment that there's no fanfare in Andor, but I'm like, you've said that, but your poster is a picture of you with the Death Star, Star Destroyers, X-Wings, and TIE Fighters behind you. And I'm like, you can't get any more Star Wars fanfare than that.
I know.
Except having a lightsaber.
Honestly, everything that has to do with publicity and stuff is just in one ear, out the other. That's what I've learned reading all of this nonsense. It's just there for the people, so they get excited. Ugh. So you put not magazines. So you put articles on the internet,
That's true. It's true. But he said it, and I'm like, hey man, you've said this, but look at the poster. So I expect Buttface and Moonda Boo Boo or whatever his name is, the guys from the bar. They're gonna come in. They're gonna be back. They're gonna be there somewhere.
Yeah. All right.
And they're gonna go to Tatooine. Tatooine will be in there somewhere.
They're gonna go. Yep. Of course. Tatooine's always gonna show up. It's like a cancer. Just never. I can't believe it. I remember when I was like, we're going back to Tatooine. It's going to be so great. And it's like, please, no more Tatooine. Less Tatooine, please.
Yes. No more. Yeah. No more. Please, no more. Well.
Okay.
Hey. There we go. This was good fun, guys. And gals and audience. Just remember to be sure to like and subscribe. That goes a long way, as well.
Yes,
as
please
sharing
like and
videos.
Subscribe, share videos, do that for us. It's gonna help,
It does. It does help.
It does help.
We're slowly growing, and we couldn't do it without you guys.
Growing.
So chores for that. But we will see everyone back next week, or hopefully as many of you as you can back next week for a deep dive into the hit show.
I don't like sand.
Andor. I don't like sand.
It's rough and coarse and irritating. Gets everywhere. Everything here. How does he talk? Wait. You underestimate my power. I used to be good at Hayden Christensen voice.
That was pretty close. I'm not gonna lie.
You underestimate my power. There we go. It's back. It's coming back. Why, Master? I don't like sand.
Blah.
Well, from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. Then you are lost, Anakin. I'm sorry, Anakin, for everything. For all of it.
Such a whiny little brat Anakin was. Such a whiny brat. What a disappointment.
You know what? I have an idea before we leave.
Okay.
We should sometimes, if we want, we can get guests. It doesn't matter who really. Like, I'm just saying, if we have more people in our podcast episode, and if you're interested, we can look for. There's a few movie scripts that I've read that have never turned into films that we could read through.
Oh,
I think that would have been fun. No.
We can. I do this in my writer's workshop. We do read-throughs, and
I just thought
I'm never given a character because I'm not an actor. So
be the narrator.
I do actually do the narration, but even that I'm not great. I'm not great at. But I could do the stage direction. We can maybe Kirsty Joe and Frank Pathfinder maybe. Bring some folks in. Do a script or do a scene, probably a scene, not a whole script.
Maybe that's better. Because but then again, there is sometimes like when you're really curious about a movie and you have a script of it and you want to know the entire story, it's always best to like read through the entire thing because then people can listen to it again.
Yes.
And then get an impression. But
I don't want to do that. We would also get copyright struck, I'm sure.
I don't know. These are old. No one cares. Like I have this old 1998 Black Widow script. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, what we can do, that could be fun. Well, what we could do is we can actually do an episode.
I'll read it first and see if it's worth doing. But other than that,
yeah, skim through, see if it's good. Because Kirsty Joe's in, we could do an episode on that. We could be like the abandoned Black Widow movie, and do a scene, but discuss the script, and do it that way. Because I mean, come on, Disney and Marvel will copyright strike us, totally.
I don't. I doubt it, but okay. I respect your thoughts.
Yeah, I just maybe not, but I don't doubt it. I feel like reading a script without permission will come back to bite us. I visited a friend, Kirsty Joseph, visited a friend in Cali once who worked at a recording studio, and they got a bunch of people together in the evening and would just read scenes and record them and stuff, and it was fun.
Oh, that sounds fun. That
sounds very actory. That's what a lot of actory people do.
They love it. They love it.
They do. They do.
All right.
They do.
I think it's time to retire.
I think so. We've had a good 2 hours, folks. So yeah, we will see you next week, September 21st at 7:30 p.m. Hasta la vista.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. Friends, just